Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
It has become a tradition on this program every year to invite some of my colleagues from the faculty to discuss the readings that they had done the summer before. And I'm so pleased to have three of my friends back to do it this year. First of all, welcome to the program Annie McKinley, and she is a member of the faculty in the speech department. Annie, you've done this many times, and we are grateful to have you back.
Grateful to be asked back.
And I'm equally pleased to have Kim Johnson, and she is also a member of the faculty in the Department of English. And Kim, it's also nice to see you again, and thank you for being with us on this discussion of your readings this past summer.
Thanks for inviting me.
And equally pleased to have our friend Denise Clark, who is a librarian at North Idaho College, and she also is a member of the faculty assembly. And Denise, you've been here from the very beginning. I don't know how many years we've done this, and, and so we're delighted to have you here. We have a 2-week series, and on the first program we're going to talk about nonfiction books that they recommend from their reading this summer, and then next week we'll deal with fiction. Denise, I'm going to start with you. You have a nice group of books there, and we'll go through one book at a time and go around with our guests. And approximately how many probably nonfiction books did you read this summer?
Oh, good heavens. I'm not sure I could answer that question. I've told friends of mine if there were an Olympic medal for reading, I might be a contender for the gold. I'm not sure, but my summers are spent just reading and reading and reading and reading.
That's great. Which book are you going to start with to recommend to our viewers? I assume that all of you bring the books which you think might be most interesting as a recommendation to our readers, to our viewers for your reading.
The first one that I'd like to talk about is one that Oprah Winfrey mentioned on her program. It's called Night by Elie Wiesel. It's a memoir of his experiences in surviving the Holocaust. Elie Wiesel grew up in a very small village in Romania, and he actually managed, he and his family kind of survived a roundup of Romanian Jews until about 1944. And I think it was in 1944 when the Nazis came through this small village of about 15,000 Jews and proceeded en masse to ship them off to concentration camps. And he and his father, mother, and sisters were shipped off. He is the only one from his family who survived the war and the Holocaust. I thought I'd read just a small passage from this because early in the war, about 1942, there was an elderly man, a religious man from the village. His name was Moche, I believe it's pronounced. It's kind of an interesting name. He was a very religious man. He was a mentor to the child, the young man, Elie Wiesel, as he was growing up. And he said that Mochi had changed. He had left the village. He had seen the transports. He had heard about the concentration camps, and he came back to the village. He survived a roundup, and he came back to the village to warn them about what was occurring in much of Eastern Europe. And he said there was no longer any joy in his eyes. He no longer sang. He no longer talked to me of God or of the Kabbalah, but only of what he had seen. People refused not only to believe his stories, but even to listen to them. He's just trying to make us pity him. What an imagination he has, they said, or even, poor fellow, he's gone mad. And as for Mochi, he wept. Jews, listen to me, it's all I ask of you. I don't want money or pity, I only want you to listen to me, he would cry between prayers at dusk and the evening prayers. I did not believe him myself. I would often sit with him in the evening after service, listening to his stories and trying my hardest to understand his grief. I felt only pity for him. They take me for a madman, he would whisper, with tears like wax flowing from his eyes.
Very, very powerful writing. we'll come back to you. I want to go over to Annie and take one of your nonfiction books and explain to our viewers why it's powerful in your view.
Okay. So I always think about when people say nonfiction, every once in a while you say, and people even kind of like sneer, oh, it's nonfiction. Like people kind of stay away from it, it seems like, it's because we have to read something like Heavy Duty or something, or The History of Dust or something. But this one, it's good. I'm just going to go from a little bit lighter tone from the one that Denise recommended. This is called Garlic and Sapphires by Ruth Rochelle. And the reason I picked this one is she was the New York Times food critic. And so she would go around and, of course, to the restaurants and be the food critic. Well, when she first took the job, she was on the plane, I believe, and somebody came up to her right away and said, oh, you're Ruth Rochelle, you're the new food critic for the New York Times. And so she kind of went, well, yes. And then she realized that she would never probably be able to give a good critique of the restaurants because they would know that it was her. I always use the example that if you know the president of the college's daughter's in your class, you might treat her a little bit differently. And so the same thing with this. So she decided, and then she found out from the restaurants that they actually would give them bonuses if they spotted her. So she would start going around in disguises, and she would take on the whole persona of whoever she was in disguise. Like she decided one time to be her mother, and so she would test out the disguises, and she would go through the whole thing with changing her hair color, the clothing, and how she would treat her differently based on her disguises, and then that's how she would write her reviews because she thought they were truer to the actual person that came in would not be treated like a restaurant reviewer. So I just find it fascinating because I don't know, maybe the viewers wouldn't think, but I think we all would like to do that sometime. It's kind of like a Halloween coming up or whatever, and it's like you'd like to go in a disguise. And I always talk about going to a conference and having my name be Bambi if they treated me differently. And so the same thing, I think, is we find, I think even we get treated differently by the way we appear. And being a communication person, I thought it was just fascinating to read. And it's fun, and but there's a lot of truism in it.
Thank you. Kim, what's the first book you want to recommend?
Well, this is the only nonfiction book I am going to recommend because I only brought two with me. But it's Gerald Durrell's My Family and Other Animals, which is a nonfiction book I found actually at the Portland airport when I was going to Greece. And this is a book that's set in Greece. And I thought that it might be about a Greek family, but actually it's about a British family who moved to Greece before World War II. And they were sick of the climate in England and just picked up and moved. And the children had to convince the mother that this was a good idea initially, but it took her, not too long to be convinced that it would be good to move to Greece, mostly for the climate. It's really a delightful book because when they get there, they rent a series of villas. The family life is very, what's the right word? It's a zoo, frankly, because the young author at the time is a budding zoologist. This is a memoir of his time then when he was maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. And Durrell later becomes quite a zoologist himself and writes a series, many books actually. It's very clear where his profession is headed from his exploits in Greece as a young boy. Not only does he collect lots of specimens which they store in different cages throughout the villas that they rent, magpies, gulls, tortoises, turtles, all kinds of insects. But the family collects eccentrics as well. The family themselves, the members are quite eccentric. The mother is very interested in cooking and makes elaborate meals, filling the kitchen with all kinds of creative things and importing all kinds of delicacies and bringing lots of local people to come help. One of the brothers fancies himself as quite a writer and invites his friends from Britain to come and stay all of the time. So the villa is filled with all of these creative types who also think of themselves as actors and other flamboyant things. The other brother is a hunter and is often shooting off his guns at all hours of the day and night in the villa. And so the book is really filled with great writing, very close observations that the young boy makes of his animal specimens and so forth, but also great observations of the family life, which, you know, there's obviously some parallels, as suggested by the title, between the interesting animals and the interesting members of the family.
I believe you have a little marker in there. You might
I
want to do
do.
an excerpt.
I would love to read one. This is one of my favorite portions, and I actually had to read it aloud to my husband because it caught my eye, and I thought it was well said and also funny. In this section, Durrell is describing tortoises, and in fact, in National Geographic style, he's describing the mating habits of tortoises. And he likens them more to battles than to anything else. And so he says, these battles were exciting and interesting to watch, resembling all in wrestling more than boxing, for the combatants did not possess either speed nor the physical grace to indulge in fancy footwork. The general idea was one and this is the section actually where the males are battling for the attention of the females. The general idea was for one to charge his rival as rapidly as possible and just before impact to duck his head into the shell. The best blow was considered to be the broadside, for this gave the opportunity, by wedging yourself against your rival's shell and pushing hard, of overturning him and leaving him flapping helplessly on his back. If they couldn't manage to get in a broadside, any other part of the rival's anatomy did just as well. Charging each other, straining and pushing their shells, clattering together, occasionally taking slow motion bites at each other's neck or retreating into their shells with a hiss, the males would do battle. Meanwhile, the object of their frenzy would amble slowly onward, pausing now and then for a bite to eat, apparently unconcerned by the scraping and cracking of shells behind her. On more than one occasion, these battles became so furious that a male in a fit of misplaced enthusiasm would deliver a broadside to his ladylove by mistake. She would merely fold herself into her shell with an outraged sniff and patiently wait until the battle had passed her by. I could go on, but stop.
Very gifted writing. Denise, we'll go back to you, and you have a couple other books there.
I have a couple of other books, and I'm going to move on to one with a lighter theme. It's called Not Buying It, My Year Without Shopping. Now, being a shopaholic myself, I thought that reading this book might prove instructive. I think all it did was point out the difficulties of determining what is a necessity and what is a luxury in today's, in our lives. Like, do we really need those lattes every day? But they may be a necessity. So here's a couple trying to reach those determinations and discussing every purchase that they must make and making lists of things that they shouldn't purchase and how do they handle birthdays and Christmases and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how complicated not buying it can get. But in the beginning of her book, this is December of 2003, and the title of her first chapter is Panic. The idea occurs to me, as so many desperate resolutions do during the holiday season. I have maxed out the Visa, moved on to the Citibank debit card, and am tapping the ATM like an Iraqi guerrilla pulling crude from the pipeline. Convinced I am picking up no more than the occasional trinket, a tree ornament for Howard and Annette, a bar of French soap for Norma, in just 2 weeks, this atheist Grinch has managed to scatter $1,001 across New York City and the World Wide Web. I am not in the spirit, but somehow I have gotten into the program. And what a program it is. Through 3 years of lusterless economic reports and rising unemployment, consumer confidence has barely flagged. The coffins are returning from Iraq. By Christmas, the U.S. body count is near 500. Still, this month, America's good guys caught Iraq's bad guy. Several employee-starved companies hired several workers, and a hoo-wah rose from the malls of America. Interviewed on the Saturday before Christmas, every shopper, Barbara D'Addario, chuckled as she told CBS what she had spent today, about $75, and I've only been here 20 minutes. What is the source of her generosity and glee? I have great hopes that the economy is improving, and we caught Saddam Hussein, said Daddario. We're very happy. We are very happy. And when we are happy, and when we are sad or angry, or bored or confused, or feeling nothing in particular, we shop.
That must cover everything. Shop no matter what the mood.
Shop till you drop.
Yeah. Annie, you have another book that's
Yes,
nonfiction?
Denise and I are playing back and forth off each other's. And now I'll go to a more serious book, and this one is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Dion. Dion. Yeah. Anyway, it's and this is about a woman whose husband dies, and she goes through her year after the husband dies, and how she goes back and looks at thinks about all the memories. And I think that, to me, it was when, if you talk to anyone, and in the last month I've had 2 people who have died in my life, and you talk to the spouses, and it's like, why didn't we see something was wrong, or why didn't we do this, and it's in how they relive all the different memories, and why didn't they catch something, or what did they say? Did they really mean something else? And it's really quite nicely done. It's like, I think for people, I just, the one little quote I'm going to have, I just happen to have this taped over my desk, so that's why I'm reading it sideways. But it says, life changes fast, life changes in the instant. You sit down to dinner, and life changes as you know it ends. And that's what happened to her. Was they were at the hospital with her daughter, very seriously ill, and she came home, and the husband died of a heart attack at dinner. So, and then later on, at the end of the book, the daughter is still alive. But later on, after she published the book, the daughter died also, and was her only child and stuff. And so it's a beautifully written book. I mean, it's just about how I think we always go back and relive things and think about things. And I know, Denise, if you wanted to jump in with the.
It was interesting because this book was released just after I lost a family member, and I thought that reading it would be probably a helpful experience, and I do think it was, but it was so painful, and such a painful and powerful book to read, that I recommend that people read it after some time has lapsed, after such a loss. But I just find it amazing that she has lost the 2 most important people in her life, her child and her husband, and within months of one another. I mean, within a very short period of time. And what a struggle it must be some days just to get out of bed in the morning and sit down and write when, and to continue on when, under such, horrible losses.
Very serious, but a lot of lessons about life and the changes in life. Kim, I'll come back to you, and then I'll go back over for another book here. But you do a lot, like the other 2 guests, you do a lot of reading. And my question would be, when you have more time in the summertime, do you prefer reading fiction or nonfiction, or do you equally enjoy both?
No, I have a clear favorite, I think, and it's fiction. I enjoy nonfiction, but I usually don't pick it up as often, especially not in the summer, which is, my preferred time to do a lot of reading. And I'm not sure why that is. I guess I just enjoy getting lost in the story. And I do so much work, so much reading, it seems, for information during the school year, that that kind of escapism, even if it isn't fantasy or whatever, is enjoyable. And there's so much fiction that I feel like I need to catch up with or get reacquainted with, that I spend certainly the majority of time reading fiction. And I am not as voracious as Denise by any means. I'm not going to be getting any Olympic medals, but I enjoy in the summer especially reading a wide variety of things, and some kind of trashy things. Not terribly trashy, but for example, this summer I read The Devil Wears Prada, which I will admit to, and I enjoyed it. I don't think I'm going to see the movie, but I enjoyed reading the book, and it was in my way a total escapism.
It is a very relaxing process and educational.
Well, yeah, I think so. Even that.
It broadens your horizons and different. Being in the English department, you certainly, I'm sure, learn a lot from different writing styles.
Well, and I think that sometimes we can run the risk of becoming snobbish, and I don't want to do that. I mean, I enjoy occasionally reading a John Grisham novel too. They seem to have the same kind of plot line, but there's some enjoyment to be had in that kind of thing. Yeah.
Thank you. And Denise, you have a third book here.
Well,
with us.
I do have a third book, and I hope this doesn't send a message that I'm on some kind of reading plan that the World War II and Nazi Germany is one of my favorite subjects to read about. It's not particularly, but I happen to pick up these. This one I'd always meant to read. This one I think everyone should read this. This one just kind of passed under my nose, and it sounded moderately intriguing, and then when I started reading it, I really fell into it. It's called The Master Plan, Himmler's Scholars and the Holocaust, and I was really fascinated by, the role that scholars may have played, in the Holocaust, and by Heather Pringle. Heather Pringle is the author's name. And it's a history of an institute, an educational society that Himmler founded in 1935. And they gave it the name Ahnenerbe, was the German word, Ahnenerbe, which means, it said it's derived from a rather obscure German word meaning something inherited from the forefathers. And I'll read just a little bit of description here because this will give you some background on the educational institute that he founded. The official mission of the Ahnenerbe was twofold. First, the institute was to unearth new evidence of the accomplishments and deeds of Germany's ancestors as far back as the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age, if possible. They were trying to prove the existence of an Aryan civilization that was far superior to any civilizations back as far as the Stone Age. Using exact scientific methods, and the author puts exact scientific methods in quotation marks, thankfully. Second, it was to convey these findings to the German public by means of magazine articles, books, museum shows, and scientific conferences. In reality, however, the elite organization was in the business of myth-making. Its prominent researchers devoted themselves to distorting the truth and churning out carefully tailored evidence to support the racial ideas of Adolf Hitler. Some scholars twisted their findings consciously, others warped them without thought, unaware of their political views, how their political views would drastically shape their research. But all proved adept at this manipulation, and for this reason, Himmler prized the Institute. He made it an integral part of the SS and housed it in a grand villa in one of Berlin's wealthiest neighborhoods. He equipped it with laboratories, libraries, museum workshops, and ample funds for foreign research, and personally befriended several of its senior scientists. By 1939, the Ahnenerbe would count 137 German scholars and scientists on its payroll and employ another 82 support workers, filmmakers, photographers, artists, sculptors, librarians, laboratory technicians, accountants, and secretaries. And they spread, they sent scholars to Tibet. They sent them all over looking for this Aryan civilization that they hoped to uncover. I think one of the reasons I found the book rather intriguing and frightening was the fact that one likes to think that scholars cannot be perverted by politics, and that is absolutely not true. I mean, scholarship can be bent to serve any purpose whatsoever, and many of these men used the political machine at that time to advance themselves, had little care that they were actually the foundational piece of the final solution. They contributed so heavily to that. In fact, some of the so-called scholars, the pseudo-scholars that they employed, were people who did cranium measurements, trying to prove that there was a Jewish race, a type, that this was not a religious, but a racial type. something that, of course, they were never able to prove. But and nothing had been written about this group and their influence in the formation of the final solution, in their close work with the SS. This author spent months, and in fact, months and months and months with a team of scholars absolutely scouring libraries and archives around Europe to really kind of unearth, the background behind this group. They had just kind of, disappeared. So many of these records had been destroyed after the war anyway. So it was really an eye-opening read.
Your example there is really interesting because in our time now, in the year 2006, as we sit here, there are so-called scholars trying to do the same thing again, and even in this country, trying to, through hate organizations, trying to indicate that there's superiority based on race or national origin. So I wonder often if they got some ideas from such organizations as these. But it certainly is it's happening, and they prayed them out as scholars and trying to prove racial superiority. I noticed, Denise, that you have a real variety from things that's that heavy and serious all the way to your shopping. Do you read at the same time, or do you read one that's serious and then go to something lighter?
I usually sandwich something lighter in between, my reading. I'll read something lighter while I'm reading Night, because, or a book like this, just simply because I can find myself in an existential funk, if I read a steady diet, of these kinds of works like Night or Master Plan.
I want to thank all three of you. It's delightful to have you here. And the good news is you'll be back next week. And on our reviewing books, next week it's going to be fiction instead of nonfiction. And as I said at the beginning of the program, ladies and gentlemen, it's something we've been doing every year. And we missed one of our guests, Dr. Virginia Johnson, who's usually with us. She had other obligations today, but she's one of those readers, too, that reads constantly. And I hope you will be with us again next week when we will have our three same guests back, and we will be reviewing recommendations they have from their summer reading in the field of fiction. And we do recommend these as well as other books to you. And until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.